Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Today we're talking to Frank Velásquez Jr. from For the Hood. Frank, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Alex. Really excited to be here.
So, Frank, for those are people who are hearing you for the very first time, could you please explain about who you are and what you do, although otherwise known as your superhero origin story?
So I feel like I'm at an age now, Alex, where I've done a lot of stuff. So I'll be as quick as possible. But like I've worked in the private sector. I want to say back in 1999, I decided to leave my hometown of Tucson, Arizona, and moved all the way across the country to Florida. And I worked at Disney World, Walt Disney World of all places. I was there for about 5 years. So go from private sector into hotel industry. I was married at the time. We decided to move back, but I wasn't ready to come back to Arizona. But we moved to Vegas, and there I worked in the casino industry for 3, 4 years, and then the recession happened, and so this had this whole career pivot. So by this time, we had already moved back to Tucson, which is where I'm from, Tucson, Arizona, and then yeah, that career pivot ended up me landing at our local community college. And I ran a scholarship program for a couple of years. And I want to say, Alex, at that point is when I discovered what I wanted to do, which is really help others. Helping students along their journeys was really rewarding. I was there for about 6.5 years, and then I landed in nonprofits. And this was in 2017. And I got my very first job in the nonprofit world was as the CEO of a small nonprofit, and to be in a position of creating culture and direction, it was intoxicating. I'm not going to lie, it was very fun. In the 3 years that I was there, watching or certainly helping students along their journeys, but creating pathways for them that honored their journey. And we'll get into this a little bit later, but I had some growing spurts. I was not aware of the difference between donor-centric fundraising and community-centered fundraising. And again, we'll get into that in a bit, but that's my journey. Let me finish my journey. So after leaving that nonprofit, I did consulting work, contract work for about 18 months. And then I worked at a chamber of commerce for about almost 3 years. Within the first 7 months of being there, though, was when I started my business For the Hood. I just really felt drawn to it, the work that I'm going to do. And again, I'll talk about that more in length. But For the Hood is really, it's more than a passion project. I don't have kids. And so I often think about what legacy am I going to leave for those uh, who come after me, And so really helping people who look like me, making their journeys easier is really what drives me.
You're right. You do have a very colorful past. That's awesome, though, because what I
Yeah.
find about people, I don't have such a similar background, but I can appreciate the fact that by having such a diverse background, you're able to see things from many different perspectives because you've been exposed to it in many different ways, and you're able to sometimes distill all of that knowledge and experience into what you're doing today. I mean
Yeah.
that's awesome to have a. Sometimes they call it like a T knowledge, where you have a lot of knowledge about, or a little bit of knowledge about a lot of things, but then a lot of knowledge about one particular thing. And I
Yes.
find that works really well
Yes.
in life.
I agree.
So, For the Hoods, can you explain a bit more about this organization? What is it? What motivated you to start it, and what is its
Yeah.
primary mission?
So so its origin isn't as great as it is now. Now that I know where I want it to go. But the origin was really simple. I part of my background, I didn't say this, but when I was in Vegas, I worked in training. So I did training and facilitation. That was really something that I really love to do is really helping people in a training setting and being engaging, et cetera, all of that stuff. So when I left the nonprofit in 2017, I had already been presenting at a national conference. And the first year after leaving the nonprofit, I used my own email address, my personal email address, my own name, and it didn't feel credible. And so by the following year, and by this time I had started at the Chamber of Commerce that I was working at. I knew the next one was coming up. The next conference was coming up. I knew they were going to invite me again. And so then I was like, I need to figure this out. I need to have a business that lends credibility to the work that I do, And that's how For the Hood actually got started. And I had an initial focus on three things, and I would say two of the three are still. Well, I would say all three are still present. But the three things that I was initially going to focus on was leadership coaching, and I was going to focus on storytelling, but more along the lines of grant writing. But I have a methodology around storytelling for grants that I think is pretty clever. And then the third thing was is language audits. And so essentially looking at processes, policies that organizations might have, and really looking for ways to make them more equitable. The best example I can give you is like flexible scheduling. When I worked at Disney World, they had flexible scheduling there. So let's say, the I think people started at 8:30, but we would have some who would come at 8:15, some who would come at 8:45, some would come in at 9 because they had families. And so that is an equitable practice that not a lot of organizations do. And so that's an example of what a language audit would be. It's just looking through their language, looking for areas where they can have more equitable processes. But that quickly shifted, Alex. And so on my experiences, and again, I'm sure we'll get into more details, but running that nonprofit for those 3 years, there was a lot of good, but it didn't end well. And what I recognized during my journey there, especially after leaving, was that I wasn't my authentic self. I thought I might have been, but I was so concerned about not messing up. You're reporting to a board for the first time. And I recognized after leaving that I wasn't my authentic self, and I didn't want to be caught up in places where I didn't feel at least somewhat authentic. And so, based on those experiences and based on my training, as I mentioned in Las Vegas, I've done training. I know what it looks like, and I thought I started to have lunch or coffee with several leaders of color in my community, individually, one on one, and I'd say, what do you think about if I started like a program where no more than 10 people, and who look like us and who are going through some stuff, um, and build that support network where you talk about the things that really happen only to us, and how do we create that space so that people feel that they can be authentic, that they can be more courageous, that they can be more joyful in the work that they do. And to a T, every person was like, Frank, that would be great, and if you create it, yeah, we need that. And so that is now the biggest program. I still do those other three things, but again, we'll talk about this later, but created the program Ascending Leaders in Color, and I'm very proud of it. And it has expanded in ways that I didn't think it would. And again, I know we'll go into that, but that's the quick story of For the Hood. And I should say really quick as well, Alex, because I think this is funny, and I might share a photograph with you as well. But the name of the business, I didn't want it to be like Velásquez Consulting, whatever. I really wanted it to have the feeling of this is more than just me. And so the name of the organization actually was inspired by my license plate. So I have a vehicle. I had wrecked one of my vehicles. I had a different personalization, get this new vehicle, and then it's like, all right, I think I'm gonna just come up with something new. Can only have seven characters on an Arizona plate, and so For the Hood is what I ended up coming up with. All my friends were like, "Oh my gosh, Frank, that is perfect." So yeah, so For DAHOOD. So when it came time to come up with the name for my business a year later, I looked at my vehicle and I was like, "That's it. It's For the Hood," and so I really enjoy the work that I'm doing so far.
That is a cute story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So Ascending Leaders in Color, this is the name of the program. I might call it ALC just for short.
Yes.
I
Yes.
love the word ascending in that. To me, that's actually one of the key. I'm sure you spent a bit of time thinking about that. It's not for leaders in color, it's for ascending leaders. So it's not that implies that it's a journey and there's no real particular end. It's wherever you are today, you want to just keep growing
Yes.
to the next level. Is that your intention?
Yes. You hit it on the nose. And there's two keywords in there. So ascending is absolutely one of them. I've had people as old as like early 60s participate in the program. And so it's not about it's how people define what ascending means. It could be like literally ascending, meaning like you want to move up into your roles, but it also and I did like a survey of like the first two cohorts, and I said, what does ascending mean to you? And a few of them also said, it's also that inner journey. And so it's not just necessarily what you're doing career wise, but what is the inner journey? And I want to point out one other keyword in there. It's in. So it's ascending leaders in color. A lot of people might say ascending leaders of color, but I was very purposeful in using in color or in the word in to say that it's bringing us into our full vibrancy. I feel again, most of us, we're not allowed to be our full vibrant selves. And so when I say ascending leaders in color, it's an opportunity for us to be our full vibrant selves. And so, yes, it's primarily focused on people of color, but and part of the growth of ascending leaders is I've started an affinity group. So white affinity group has participated. I've done it virtually now. So it's really cool to see how it's grown. But the name, yeah, ascending, and then of course in.
I'm curious to know I mean, you mentioned what you're hoping to achieve, but like there must have been a feeling of a need for this. Like you said earlier, you were socializing the idea, and people said, "Oh, this is great, this is great." Like, what were the main points that you were trying to achieve that when you're thinking about ideas, usually you look for a demand or a need or a gap of some kind, and then you say, how can we fill it? And then you spend some time figuring it out. Like, what was the gap that you were trying to fill when building this program?
Yeah, it's a great question, Alex. I think, honestly, I think the gap was really just not having enough people in leadership spaces. I think the statistics in the US, Alex, is that 83% of C-suite level positions are occupied by white folks. That's like 17% for people of color. And so that was almost like a starting point of how do you how do you stay authentic, or how do you maintain your authenticity when you're rising into leadership spaces that weren't designed for you? And so that was really the impetus, because I personally experienced it myself going through those 3 years with that nonprofit. And I knew one thing needed to happen was there needed to be community, because you don't often see people who look like you in these roles, as I just gave you the statistics. So how do you proactively connect folks together? And that's where I thought this program would be great. And mind you, I've gone through 7 cohorts, and it's been word of mouth, and I've been fortunate to be in many spaces where this has happened. Having gone through these experiences personally, I knew I needed to make space, and I'll give you my little pitch on it. So I call it the 3 R's. It's a space for people of color to authentically be real. It's a space for them to reconnect with other leaders of color. And it's a space for them to reclaim every part of who they are as they are moving into these leadership spaces. The end result really is what I said earlier is, I want them to, after they complete the program, I want them to be able to feel that they can lead with more authenticity, more courage, and more joy. Those were the things that I knew I needed. And just being in community with other folks, it's been great, and that's what I knew our leaders, particularly in my community, needed. They needed to have, they needed to be in space with one another, and certainly as a person of color, we do a lot of code switching, and we can go into detail of that, if you'd like, but being able to speak in the way we speak, being able to lead in the way that we lead, is really important. And so that was why I knew the space was needed, and the people who've gone through it, who've really put a lot of trust in me, because I just built it up from the ground, and there's still a lot of things that I need to do now to ensure that it grows in a way that it needs to grow. But it's been really cool to see people in a space where they feel that they can be their unfiltered selves, and that's what I love.
You mentioned there's 3 R's: real, reconnect, and reclaim.
Yep.
First two, I get it's clear right out of the gates. The reclaim, though, that word is interesting because it could mean that you've lost something and now you need to find it again. Was that the intention? And if so, what did
Sort
you?
of.
Okay.
Sort of. So reclaim, the way I'm looking at it, Alex, is in America. I call it a Eurocentric type of leadership. And so it centers around whiteness. There's things that are connected to whiteness that, quite frankly, they're not connected to people of color. And so when I say reclaim, we kind of have to drop some of the things that make us us in order to fit into this space or these expectations in a Eurocentric model of work of a workplace. So some of it could be well, I mentioned code switching, so talking a certain way is a big thing. If you talk, more of like a street language, sometimes people will be, sometimes those leaders will view you differently, or even the way you dress. So uh, partner of mine, we're going to be doing a session in September around the bias of professionalism. Essentially, it's like redefining or defining professionalism on our terms. And really that centers around dress, language, those pieces. And so those are some examples and certainly some of the topics that come up with my program as well with ALC, code switching, microaggressions, bias of professionalism, the effects of assimilation, tokenism, colorism. All of those things are things that we uniquely feel or have to go through as people of color. And so yeah, anyway, I know I'm babbling at this point, but certainly that's kind of what it looks like.
Yeah, this is, forgive my ignorance, code switching is a new term for me. Maybe you could just, because you
Yeah.
mentioned dress,
So
language, and biases. Could you, if someone asked you in the elevator, what does that mean? How would you define code switching?
yeah, code switching is when we shift our language and like even with you. So I've got my professional, the way I talk. But if I'm with my friends, I might talk with a little bit more slang or a little bit more comfort. I wish I could give you an example, but like I say y'all or stuff like that. But really the code switching is shifting your language so that it fits into the construct of what the expectations are in the workplace. And so I don't know if you've heard like of Ebonics or certainly Spanglish, so a lot of that are kind of like examples of code switching, and there's ways that we talk that we do shift so that it makes other people feel comfortable. And what I loved about it, I mentioned earlier about being unfiltered. When you're in a space, and I remember this very distinctively with my third cohort, two people in that group in the middle of it were like, I cannot believe that I am in a space like I can just say whatever I want. And it really, it's like taking off a mask. And so you get to talk the way you talk. And when you're in a room full of everybody who looks like you can feel it. You don't have to have this mask on of what professional talk is. And I know this isn't on video, but I'm putting up air quotes because I do have a feeling about that word professionalism because I think it was constructed by white folks. And so again, redefining what professionalism looks like for people of color could have elements of that, but it's certainly going to include, as I mentioned, dress, how we talk, how we walk, all of those things. Hopefully that helps.
It does. Yeah. I mean, I haven't heard the term, but I know the understanding, the principle behind it. I would call it context switching or
Mm,
just addressing, changing your language based on your audience, for example. When I'm talking to someone who's more
right.
technical, I will go more technical. If I'm talking to someone who's more business, I'll talk more business. So that's a great word. I'll make sure to keep that term in my pocket. I also wanted to mention the sense of community. So for the record, I think variety is the spice of life. Like life is
Mhm.
better when we are all together, all mixed. At the same time, I totally believe that having a sense of community of like-minded people or like looking people, whatever you want to call it, but just a small tribe of people where you can just, to your point, take off the mask to a certain extent, just let loose, be yourself, whether it's a gender specific or psychographic or age thing,
Hey, Alex
whatever
here.
category
I
makes
want to
sense
take a
for you, and
brief
you might have
moment and
more than
thank you for
one,
listening.
to be
If
able
you've
to really
enjoyed this
connect with
episode
people
so
and learn
far,
from
please
people who are
consider
in a
sharing
similar
it with someone
experience
who
or
would also benefit
similar
from its
moment in time as
insights.
you.
It's
Like that
these
is
kinds of referrals that
precious.
really
That is
help the show
really, really
Yeah.
grow.
precious. And I agree
You
that
can also
sometimes
show your
we don't
support
have
by
enough
making
of
a
it.
small
There's a certain
donation.
sense in today's
I don't
age
do corporate
where we're supposed to be
sponsorships
strong and
or product
independent and not need
placements,
anybody
so
else.
I rely on your
But if we do
support
go
to keep
back
the
to
show
our
going.
history, like
You
in the
can visit
tribal
my
type stuff, we
website,
were all we had
agentsofnonprofit.com,
that tribe
and click
always.
Support Us in the top menu.
Our community was our
Thank you
tribe, and they
kindly.
were all similar. And we've gone so far
Mhm.
away from that we've lost that kind of connective tissue. And we have
Mhm.
to purposely now look for it, in my opinion, today, and to rekindle that kind of connection because it allows you to explore so much more and feel connected. Like, there's a reason why AA exists, for example, or drug use is because you want to find people
Mhm.
who are in the same spot as you to be able to share stories and feel supported. And it goes across, every different kind of
Yeah.
parameter that we have as humans.
Yeah. I agree.
So in color, so you mentioned in color as sense of, I'll use the words non-whites. Is there a particular psychography or category, or not in them? Is there a particular group of people that you're trying to cater this tribe towards, this community towards? Like, are there people that it's intended for, and people who maybe not would benefit less from it if they were to join?
Right. So, you know, so I'll start here. So the first 5 cohorts were all people of color, about 10 people in each group. But I always had, well, I shouldn't say I always had, but as I was moving through this, I was really looking for a space, and a concept, and now I call it healing separately to lead collectively. And what that means is that there is a necessity for people of color to have their own spaces to heal, because usually if there's white folks there, um, as I mentioned earlier, we've been conditioned to ensure that white folks feel comfortable. And so having a separate healing space takes away that thing, and we can truly, unfiltered, talk about the things that are really happening to us. But I didn't want to exclude white folks because I know that there's a lot of allies who want to be a part of that journey, with the understanding that they're going through their own healing journey. Not as a person of color, but and the way I sometimes kind of phrase it as well, Alex, is one as an oppressed group, and then the other as the oppressor. And so even if the white folks aren't oppressors currently, certainly their ancestors were. And so what I say is that typically white folks, they carry, and there's a theme, they carry guilt and shame. And so they're down for the cause, they want to help, but they're still carrying that guilt and shame. So how do you provide a space for them to kind of walk through their learning? And so my 6th and 7th cohort was the first one where I had a white cohort, but they're actually going through the program together, meaning they meet at the same building, we break bread together, and then at the top of the hour, they split off into each of their respective healing spaces. After they meet 10 times, these cohorts just ended like a week ago. Then the goal is then, all right. And I pose the question, how are you planning to lead together? So I do advocate for separate healing spaces. I think one of your questions, which you kind of just did a form of, was asking me, well, who is it not intended for? It's really intended for anybody who's wanting and willing to acknowledge the history of the U.S. In regards to who they oppressed. And as an ally or as a potential ally, if you can if that's your first step in acknowledging that that happened and that it was harmful and that it continues to today, then that person should be in my program, because it's the beginning of their healing journey, in order to collectively lead.
I definitely like the fact that I'm going to say it again because the dynamic definitely changes when there's different people in the room, right? The more similar people you have, the more layers you can remove.
Mhm.
The example I was thinking of, and I did mention it earlier, but if you have a room with 10 men and only
Oh
men,
yeah.
it's different than if you got 9 men and 1 woman. Like just introducing that one extra person of the other gender completely changes everything. Like people will just act differently.
Yeah.
So to be able to remove that layer, I think is great. And maybe I should have said that earlier, but I really wanted to mention it now because I thought it was really important because I think everyone can associate with that one.
That has come up, so it's not just the intersection, which is one of the other topics we talk about. It's called intersectionality. What that term means is the intersection of gender, race, sexual orientation. And so there's thought into that, which is why I have that as a topic, because if you're a Black transgender woman in the US, those are 3 intersections of discrimination. And so wanting to address that, trying to be mindful of who is in the space, I've really tried to make it, yes, it starts with race, But then I also have the knowledge, well, who else is in the space, meaning in regards to gender, in regards to sexual orientation. All of those pieces then come into play as well. And it's a tricky way to maneuver through these things. But to me, it all centers around race in regards to the history of the U.S. Because it began with slavery and Japanese internment camps, um, Mexican folks like myself. That's where it starts. But then having that broader understanding of, okay, well, that's the first intersection. But now what about the intersection of gender? What about the intersection of sexual orientation, disabilities? All of those come into play after that. So then that's where it really becomes this exponential space of multiple marginalized groups. But how do you, to me, and again, how it starts for me is it does start with race, and then you can kind of build out from there. And mind you, my program has not been perfect. I've had some learnings as you're going through it. You're like, oh, I need to be more inclusive of these folks, and not that I was intentionally being exclusive. It's just a matter of like I don't know their needs until they're there, and then when they share it, then I have a better understanding of what the needs are.
We actually were going in the same direction with our thoughts because my question was more because we mentioned we're talking about race mostly, but it doesn't include or includes genders, sexual orientation. Like it's not. Just want to make sure that was
Yeah.
you're nodding your head, by the way, for the
Yes.
people who can't use.
Yes.
So yeah, so the main criteria is color and not anything else. And I like the fact that you do have once in a while, Caucasians in there because I think it's in any situation when if you talked about oppressed and oppressors, it's usually the oppressed who can't solve the problem on their own. They need help. By definition, they need help from other people because they're being oppressed. They can't remove the oppression entirely by themselves. They need to reach out and have someone else grab their hand, and together, the oppressed and the oppressors can solve the issue. Would you agree with that?
Somewhat. So here's how I would look at that. So to me, it's not the oppressed don't have the abilities. It's that they don't, the construct, systemic oppression. There's been things built in the system that keep them there. So you can go like from voting rights to GI Bill, all of those pieces. They all favored white folks, and so and then the civil rights. Obviously in the 1960s, what's going on right now? The removal of affirmative action. They all have impacts, and so it's not that they can't do it. They're starting at different levels of. So it's not a level playing field. So, but what I do agree with what you're saying is you said about working together. We need the allies because they are the ones who are benefiting from the system. So we need allies to help us tear down those systems, rebuild them, restart them, recreate. So I often look at, and I don't want to use the word oppressed, I'm going to just say marginalized groups. I look at marginalized groups as they have the answers they have the solutions to the needs in their communities because they're living them. What's preventing all of these things from improving, even nonprofits, they have a hand in this, particularly in the US. They weren't originally designed to help, social services. And so how do nonprofits look at themselves? How does the US look at their nonprofits as well? How do those things happen in order to make actual change? And there has been, if you're following the news, there's been an attack on the nonprofits here in the US by the current administration, and I know why it is. And there's a large portion of nonprofits that serve marginalized groups, or that work with marginalized groups, I should say. So, so all of those things, it feels complicated, but to me it's as simple as the community, they know their needs, but they don't have access to money, they don't have access to resources. Let's give them the access to those things, and I feel like almost immediately you're going to start seeing changes in the community.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I completely agree. And I also like the fact that you said you used the word it wasn't perfect from the beginning, these cohorts, which is amazing because to me, a lot of people don't start things because they believe they need it to be perfect versus the
Yeah.
expression done is better than perfect. Like get a like start, build the plane as you're flying it, and improve as you go along. The most
Yeah,
important thing to do is start.
I,
And
I would agree. Yeah,
exactly.
that was yeah, and I well, let me tell you this. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but I'm sure your audience would love to look it up. There's something that's called the characteristics of white supremacy culture, and it's usually like things that show up in the workplace, but they're very white, as I mentioned, white supremacy focused. And so so perfectionism is one of them. Individualism is another one. Either or thinking, the written word is God, and there's like a whole bunch of them. But when you said perfectionism, so here I am as a man of color. I grew up obviously in the US. And so that was something that has been hard to get over. Being perfect, being, try, like you said, not getting things done, but wanting it to be ready to go. And so for my own learning, as I'm going through this journey of even with ascending leaders in color, is is that when I get the feedback, like how it could be better, it's the hardest question to ask, Alex. And it can be really like you take it personal, but you're like, no, you're asking these questions because you want the program to be better. You want it to be inclusive. And yeah, so I have to get over my own sense of perfectionism and get over the piece, especially of being taking offense to really constructive, feedback, because ultimately I want the Ascending Leaders in Color program to be welcoming, that people come out of it just really feeling that they've learned a lot, not only for themselves but with each other. So yeah. So anyway, I needed to throw that in because yeah, perfectionism has been yeah, that's a hard one to get over with. But yes, we need to just start and be okay with not perfect.
the tip that I would give to share with you is that the program isn't for you, right? It's for the
Yeah,
constituent, the people, and therefore
yeah.
you might start it with intentions, the best intentions, and what you think would be the best approach, but then you get that feedback to say, well, it's great if you just refine this little piece here or add this little piece there. Again, they're giving you the feedback that they want to receive, and then you just make it better
Yeah,
and better. And because it's for them, keeping that perspective might help you not let your ego get in the way so much.
Yes, yes, yes. No. Yep, I agree.
You mentioned it's limited to 10 people per session or per cohort. Why only 10?
Oh, that's a great question, Alex, and it's very simple. Um, it's been my experience that small groups, you can dive deeper. You can dig deeper. If you have a cohort of 20, 30 folks, particularly I look at it through the lens of an introvert. They may participate, but the digging deeper isn't going to happen. And so my program is about, well, it's 2.5 hours, but the first half hour is just feeding them. Then the 2 hours of the actual program, I ask three basic questions, and really I want to give them space to think about that and that everybody contributes. And so let's say if you're participating in my group, and I'll tell you what the three questions are. The first question, I give them resources to read or to watch like a week before we meet. Three questions are always the same. First question is what resonated from the articles and the videos. That conversation goes for about an hour. Second question is what are your takeaways from our conversation, not from the articles, but from our conversation? And then the last question is all about recentering joy because some of the topics can be pretty heavy. And so I'll say something along the lines of like I know this topic was heavy for some of us, and I don't want you to feel raw as we exit out of our circle. So what are some ways that you can recenter your joy before we exit out? So those are my three questions. But to your question about 10, because it's only 10, as I mentioned, everybody gets an opportunity to speak. And then I give space, even if they don't, let's say that they don't want to, they're still processing. So I might say something to you, Alex, along the lines of like, Alex, I know you haven't said anything so far. I want to make sure that there's no pressure to say anything, and but I want to make sure that I'm giving you space if you do have something to share. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to share, and it's that space of making sure that they feel comfortable to share. But anyway, so that's why it's 10. It's really so we can dig really, really deep and go into places that they may not have expected to go.
This might seem like an odd question to ask, but I'm always curious. Being a technologist myself, AI is a big component of a lot of what I work with, at least talk about and hear and listen to it. I'm curious. This is obviously a very human-centered approach to community. I'm just curious to know if there's any aspect of AI that you use or can use or have thought about using in building the program or connecting people or in the program itself. Like, is there anything, or is this used like, what, AI is great, but this is it's completely separate from what we're trying to achieve here?
Well, in regards to designing it, I absolutely use AI. So, I knew the concepts, but as I'm trying to grow it, I use Claude, and so I'll the Claude AI to help me with questions, to help me with other pieces of like just hey, what days are available, or like I want it to be every third Thursday each month, blah blah blah. I'll ask those types of questions in order to create the design or the structure of it. But I want to get back to the questions again. The questions I've used a lot. So as I mentioned, I have three base questions, but then at the end of the program, I do a listening session. I want to. This is where I get the feedback, and so I often use AI. Like, give me questions for a listening session, blah blah blah. It spits them out, and then I just start. What's the word? Just kind of like massaging them, so it sounds like me. But AI is absolutely important in regards to at least even a starting point. Like, hey, I need this, I need this to look like this, and then it pops it out. So that's how I use AI. I don't use it obviously in the actual implementation of the program, but I use it at the start for the design and then for the feedback questions at the end.
Are these programs recorded at all? Like, there is an opportunity if you were to go. I mean, I know it's a sensitive and you want to keep it a safe space, but again, just the technology part of me couldn't help to think that if it was recorded, you could have an AI then spit out summaries or transcripts
Hmm.
or some
That
kind
is
of
true.
way to be able to analyze the data that you maybe have missed along the way. So I'm curious to know if that was ever a consideration.
Not initially, but yes, it is now. And so, yeah, so I don't, so the record, so the sessions themselves, the meetups, the circles, I don't record them, but I do record the last one because it's really just for transcription purposes, and for what you just said. Like at some point, I need to look for summaries, et cetera, and that's the best way to do it. So I do let them know. I said, hey, I'm recording this. I said, but it's really just for transcription purposes. But absolutely, it's super helpful in kind of putting those thoughts together.
So last question I wanted to ask was, if you had a superpower to be able to change something in your space, what would it be?
Oh man, the thing that just popped up. It's the country. Our U.S. is going through some stuff right now, and it's hard. It's tough. It's difficult. It's scary. People are feeling a certain way. So if I had the power to change anything, it would be to help everyone see the importance of human rights. Because I think that's what we need right now, and certainly what happened last Saturday with the demonstrations, the No Kings parades, and all that stuff, and just seeing it from city to city. My hope or the superpower is to take that energy and move it into real action so that we can change the systems that are in the US that have really oppressed, and not just people of color, a lot of marginalized groups. And so that would be my superpowers, is just to help people flip that switch and see, oh, I'm actually a part of this. I need to make action to help our community, help our country, help our states, help our regions. That would be that would be my wish.
I think it's a fantastic superpower. I've been thinking about this recently too. Um, I think kindness, we're missing a bit of kindness in the world. Just general blanket kindness, being good to each
Yeah.
other. I think that would
Yeah.
be something wonderful to improve.
I think that's why I wanted to do this healing separately to lead collectively cohorts, where they go through the same times, we meet at the same place, and then we go into our respective spaces. I think that's what it is because we can't do it alone. We need our allies and we need people who can advocate for us because the stuff that's happening in the US, these are embedded. And so how do you move out of that? And so, yeah, you just made me do a quick reflection on why it's important and why we all need each other. It's not just people of color. We need our allies and we need our allies to understand the oppression that we've gone through and not feel the guilt and shame, as I said earlier, or move past the guilt and shame.
Frank, this has been wonderful, touching, emotional. Thank you so much for sharing and for being a bit vulnerable. I'm hoping you can share some contact information with our listeners so that if they have more questions or they want to learn more about this program, Ascending Leaders in Color, that they can reach out to you. How can they do that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. forthehood.com. That number is 4, and then it's DAHOOD.com. Me personally, or certainly my program, info@forthehood.com or frank@forthehood.com. When you're on the website, you'll see the link to Ascending Leaders. We are planning to launch some more beginning in July. So I'm really excited to keep this journey going. We've got 7 cohorts completed and the work continues.
Hopefully another 7,000 to go.
Yes, that would be amazing.
Or not, actually. Maybe there'll be a point where it won't be needed anymore. Wouldn't that be interesting?
That's the goal too.
Frank, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Alex, for having me. I really appreciate the space and the time and you personally. So continue to work yourself, my friend.
Thank you. I will. All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.